All right. Well, again, thank you all for being here tonight for our Monday guest speaker series. We are so glad to have you. My name is Shannon Sheehy. I am the manager of the careers team here at CodeU, which is really great team that helps you all mostly at the end of your journey with CodeU. So we help you with finding jobs, applying to them, working on your projects. We actually, as kind of a preview, just added 2 new folks to our team that are going to be focused on helping alums with bulking up their portfolios and projects, which I think is going to be a really cool resource for you. Before we get to our speaker tonight, just a few announcements to share. We do have a really great slate of speakers lined up over the next month. So next week, we have a mental health workshop. The following week, 24th, we have a employer spotlight from Standard Data. They're going to be talking about automation and controls engineering. On March 3rd, we have one of our mentors who created his own app. So he's going to be talking about creating an app and launching that. And then another mentor the following week, March 10th, is going to present on strategies for online privacy and security. We even have a few more scheduled out afterwards. So keep an eye on Slack. We will continue to share the schedules for those, but we are really excited to have all of those lined up. If you have a topic that you'd be interested in hearing about or even presenting on, feel free to message me. We try our best to find speakers that you all are really interested in and requesting and topics that you all want. So feel free to let me know. Second, our careers team is working on some really engaging events, so keep an eye out for those. We try to do a few hiring events, demo days, career days, things like that every year. We do have an in-person event coming up in Louisville next month on March 13th, so you'll see some information about that in Slack. And then we are not actually running this event ourselves, but there's an event called Undercover Lex happening in Lexington on March 6th. And we're sharing the information for that out on Slack as well. So if you're in the Lexington area, keep an eye out for that. Finally, if you're a student who started in our August cohort and you are attending as part of your career readiness requirement, please remember to fill out the form in your Google Classroom so that you'll get credit for attending. But it looks like from the chat, a lot of you all are in intro or maybe even done with classes. So that's great. You're here for your knowledge, which is fantastic. A couple housekeeping items. Shara wants this to be conversational, so please definitely feel free to unmute yourselves when the time is appropriate to hop in or to participate. But if you're not speaking, please just keep yourself on mute so we can minimize background noise. You can also feel free to use the chat to list any questions or comments you may have. If there's any that are relevant to what we're talking about, I'll throw those out, and then we'll definitely have time at the end to answer any other questions. So thank you for following along with that. And we're going to get to the stuff now. So tonight we are joined by Shara Hutchinson, and Shara is going to present Talking Tech to non-tech people. So with that, I'll turn it over. Thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Shannon. Well, hello, everybody. Hopefully you can see me. Let me see if I can pin myself. I guess I'm going to share my screen, so I don't need to do that. And as Shannon mentioned, I do want to make this conversation. I'm going to be talking about communicating technical information to a non-technical audience. And judging by the chat, it looks like either you're a developer or you are in data analytics, which means that each of those roles, regardless, you will need to communicate technical information to non-technical folks, or they will be sharing their ideas or thoughts about what they want developed, or maybe they need a dashboard, or maybe they want some sort of data, and they will speak it to you in language that may not be technical. And then you'll need to be able to either ask the right questions or need to deliver their request and kind of understand what they're doing. So my hope today is to help answer any questions that you have surrounding communication, because this is a big deal. It's a big deal now, but I think even as we evolve and we're using more AI, right? AI is able to do a lot of technical activities right now. And so the developers and data analysts who shine and who stand out are going to be the ones who can translate information and leverage AI and leverage technology. And so it will make it even more advantageous to be able to communicate well. So before I jump in, I'll share a little bit about why I'm on the screen with no shoes on, standing on the table. I have a book called Barefoot in the Boardroom. And I got that title from, I was getting ready to give a presentation in the boardroom several years back and with some executive leaders, and I had been walking around in heels all day. My feet were hurting. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to take my shoes off if I'm going to present. And if you've ever wrestled with something like, is this professional? What are people going to think? I already felt awkward anyway, or when I'm around people. I don't know if you all feel awkward when you're around a bunch of people, especially if you don't know them, but I do. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I was like, well, oh, good. I'm not alone. Thank you so much. Yes. All the thumbs up. So I was feeling awkward, and I'm like, and now on top of this, I'm going to have to take my shoes off because I'm in so much pain that if I don't take them off, I'm not going to be effective. So I took the shoes off and I presented the dashboard that I was presenting. And, I got a couple of stares, right? Because sometimes when you do something that's out of the norm, someone's going to look at you weird. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what are they going to say? And one of the executives said, Shara, you're barefoot in the boardroom. That's a book title. And I was like, huh, you're right. And so I tell that story because sometimes you expect one result or answer from standing up and being, stepping against the norm or just being yourself, when in reality, maybe it's going to spark a good idea, right? And so I communicated something without words by just taking my shoes off. I communicated that if I don't avoid this pain, I'm not going to be able to be effective. And it was well received. So I'll encourage you all today, like, no matter what, even if you think you're going to look silly, even if you think, who's going to listen to me? If whatever you think, it's not going to be as bad as you think. And so with that being said, we're going to talk about effective communication for tech professionals, being able to bridge the gap between technical and non-technical audiences. I do have up on this screen the chat. So if at any time you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. Again, this presentation is for you because I want to be effective and I want you all to get any questions you have answered regarding being good communicators, right? Because that's essential to your roles as developers. And so again, this will be conversational. And so if you have an answer, you can either chat it or you can just unmute. Either way, we don't have a too big of a group today. So if you just want to unmute and answer, that's fine. Or I'm looking at the chat. What do you consider good communication? Does anybody have a response for that?
Clear and concise.
Clear and concise. That is a good one, Shannon, because for a long time I was not concise, and I would take like 5 minutes to explain something that would take maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes. And as a developer or even data analytics, you will interface with executive leaders or some decision maker. And when you put a lot of effort into something, I don't know if you've ever done this, where you like spend hours on something or days or weeks on something, you're just excited about sharing it. And it's like, hey, and I want to tell you all the 17 steps that I did, and it took me 2 weeks, and here's what, like all of that. And then the decision maker is like, I don't care. Like, give me 3 bullet points of, and you're like insulted. What do you mean? Do you realize how much work I put into this? And so being clear and concise is huge. That was one of the biggest lessons that I had to learn in communication. And when I did I did 2 TEDx talks. I don't know if you're familiar with TEDx talks, but I've done 2 TEDx talks. And when I did my first one, I shared an 8-year journey during that TEDx talk. And I had to condense an 8-year journey into 10 minutes. And that exercise taught me how to trim the fat, like what's really important. And later on, we'll get to kind of talking through the audience in a couple scenarios, but that's a really good one. Shannon is being clear and concise. I see in the chat also honesty and integrity in your word, being genuine in your intentions and expectations is good communication. I completely agree with that. And in today's world, we have a lot of people who may not operate in integrity or honesty. And that, you're talking about standing out and being the best of the best. Those people who have integrity and honesty, I think will stand out. So again, remember when I first started, I mentioned AI. How many of you are using AI like in your work or anything? Thumbs up. So a lot of people using AI. So you see the capabilities of all of the technology, right? So can you imagine what is going to happen with developers in the future? What is going to happen with data analytics, professionals in the future? Like the only thing that's going to make you stand out is probably your human elements, right? Like that honesty, that integrity, that ability to ask the right questions, the ability to understand maybe how someone feels about a particular project or initiative. Because in the past, if you know developers from years ago, there was a divide between development and data analytics folks and the business customer facing folks, right? There was a divide, and the developers could hide in the corner and be like, I'm just, oh, you can't see me act like I'm typing, so I have to do it like it's like I'm just typing, typing away, hiding, crunching numbers, all of that. And that was acceptable in the past, and it was okay. And it was almost like a elite club, like, oh, we're the developers, and oh, we're the customer facing folks. The day is here and coming to where that divide is smaller and smaller. So if you don't take anything else away from today, take away what makes you stand out, especially if you're switching careers and looking for a new job. Being able to even communicate your value and what you're adding is going to be important. So thank you for that. I know I'm giving long answers to these. The ability to determine audience engagement levels, that is vital, because as a developer, data analyst, and other technical roles, you have to understand that you have different audiences. You're going to have your maybe there will be some junior developers that you work with. Maybe there'll be some decision makers. Maybe there'll be some middle managers. Then maybe there'll be some supervisors. Maybe there's going to be a customer. And another trend that I'm noticing in the tech world is developers and data analysts and app people, like now they are interfacing with the customers, whereas before they did not. Like years ago, they didn't interact really with the customers as much. And so now being able to understand the audience and even knowing what should I say and what shouldn't I say. Like, so for example, there may be a bug or an issue that you uncovered, and you could be on a call with a customer and you're like, yeah, this is a bug, it's not working. They, that's scary to them. They don't understand, even if it's not that big of a deal. And so being able to understand your audience is important. In the days before the extrovert, yes, the extroverts have taken over the industry. It is true. Or either technology has taken over the industry and now we have to all kind of interact with more people. Either way, it calls for a change in how we operate. So thank you for sharing the answers for what you consider good communication. I'll just add in, Shannon I think she had a view of my slides before I started, because the two words that I had here was clear, concise. It's information is easily understood. So something that I do to help be more clear when I'm getting ready to speak or concise is like before a meeting, like writing out what I'm going to say. And another tip for you, if you are getting ready to meet with someone or communicate with them, even thinking, what questions might they have, right? What might they say? And writing those down in advance so that you can prepare. So the information is easily understood when you communicate. It's concise, unnecessary details. How many of you have been a part of a meeting and someone's sharing jargon or acronyms that you don't understand? And it's like, or you start a new job and they're like, yeah, and the OMP and the MMP and NOS and and you're like, what are you talking about? That could be also if you say API or you say SQL or you say database, or you like, there may be words that you use that could be considered jargon to the user. And I'll give an example a little bit later as well. So concise is not just like using less words, but it's being effective in your communication without using unnecessary details or jargon. And thanks again for all the thumbs up and everything. Being virtual, it does help to see like hands raising and the thumbs up. So I appreciate it in the chats. Also, good communication is contextual. So tailor to the audience need. This was also, someone mentioned it earlier. It was Amber, which, you want to provide the right context for, so there's content and then there's context. Like the content is the information, but the context is, why are you sharing this with me in the first place, right? So when I started the communication, this session, I looked at the roles that you were in, right? Like, so I saw the chat. Thank you for those who submitted. Your data analyst, you're starting a new class, your developers, you're segueing into development. Well, that gave me context for who I was talking to. So if you noticed, now when I'm speaking, I'm using those titles because that is context for the audience. If this is my first time speaking to you all, I have no idea what you do. And so if I just start talking and rambling off and you're like, yeah, we are QA testers, then I would tailor it to being a QA tester if someone was in that particular role. And so the context matters so that you can feel like, oh, this person's actually talking to me, not just giving general information. Lastly, for the good communication, it is two-way. It encourages feedback and collaboration. So the same thing that I'm modeling with you today, right? Like I didn't just come in here and say, here's my 32 slides and I'm going to tell you how to be good communicators. Well, no, I want to know like where you are, what type of experiences have you had? Like even with the jargon, asking the questions, getting feedback and collaborating, because I don't have all the answers. You have the answers. And sometimes it's just being reminded of like, oh, you know what? I don't like when that's done to me. So I probably shouldn't do that, because there's times where we hear the jargon or we hear people, communicating with us and it doesn't make sense, or the instructions are not really clear. And we don't always realize when we do that as well, especially if we're excited about the work we do. One thing that I didn't mention earlier, I mentioned about my book, Barefoot in the Boardroom. The work that I do is change management. So I help organizations who are navigating through a change. Maybe they're implementing a new technology. Maybe they're going through a restructuring, a merger, acquisition, or something along those lines, and helping their employees adopt it. So how many of you have worked somewhere and your company has rolled something out new and then a few months later, nobody did it? Like people were like, I'm not using the new software. I'm not doing the new process. I'm not doing things the new way. Well, the reason why is because there is some principles called change management, right? That go alongside project management to help people adopt it. And I'm actually building a software. So in May, yeah, this is February. So the first week of May, release one of my software will be out. And so I'm not sharing anything like technology-wise that I'm not living or experience. I also worked at a tech startup for almost 10 years, leading their service and support department before I started my own business. And so that tech company was growing 30% year over year. My team was responsible for writing requirements for the software. My team was also responsible for doing quality assurance, and they were responsible for testing the application. And so in all of the umbrella that we had over our services that we provided, we had to communicate with different audiences, communicating with the CTO, communicating with the DevOps team, communicating with project management, communicating with product management, communicating with the implementation team. And so there was a lot of communication that happened, and I'll tell you, I was not perfect. I learned a lot along the way, and learned to understand each person's unique gifts and communicate to them in a way that they could understand. And so the only way to really collaborate is if you understand who you're talking to and what's important to them. So another question I want to ask is, why do you think that good communication is critical in the tech industry? I mean, I alluded to a few examples, but I just want to get your thoughts and opinions too. Like, why is it important? You can either put it in the chat or you can unmute if you'd like and just share why you think it's important. What trends are you seeing like in the tech world or dev world that makes you believe that it's important to be able to communicate well?
Hi, Shara. Can
Hi.
you hear me?
Yes.
I'll start off by saying that because just the technical nature of the work, things have to be precise
Yes.
and correct.
Yeah. And Brett, that is a great point. And I don't even think I added anything about that in my presentation, but being precise and correct is important, because when you're building an application or you are creating a dashboard or getting data for decision makers, there's money on the line. There's a cost associated with it. And so when I worked at the software company, one of the things that happened early on in the beginning, requirements. Is everybody familiar with requirements? Like for software where you're pretty much writing up a scope of work. You familiar with that? Like writing up, if you're a developer or you're creating a dashboard, and I just saw somebody else as a technical project manager, whoever the sponsor is, or the person who needs the application or the dashboard, is going to write up requirements or the scope of work to say, here's what I want, right? Here's why I need it. Here is, the outcome that I want. And it may not be in technical information. And somebody's going to need to translate that into into language that the technical person can understand, or the technical person who's developing it will need to ask the questions to say, like, hey, are you sure you need this? So if it's not accurate and precise, then you could develop something that the person who purchased it doesn't even want. I wish I would have thought about this in advance, because I would have had, there's an image out there, maybe you've seen it, where it's like, this is what the customer thought they were getting, this is what the project team said it was going to be, and this is what was actually delivered. And so that is a perfect, why didn't I think of that? Brett, see, I should have talked to you beforehand. Maybe I'll pull it up while we're talking. But Lisa, were you gonna say something?
I was thinking, are you thinking of that one with, like, it's a bunch of different trees with swings on them, and
Yes.
One of them has like the swing like through the trunk, and
Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, I'm gonna see if I can find. Yeah, I did. It was quick.
Well, while you're looking for that, can I share real quick?
Yes.
So I was just going to share I do a lot of data reports for, my manager and all of that. And I find that a lot of times, if the communication isn't clear, then when they ask me to pull, a certain set of data to create a report, I'm pulling it one way, thinking that's what they want. And when I send it, they're like, well, actually, we would also like da 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 da. So
yes,
sometimes it would just take a lot of the, being virtual and all of that, and trying to figure out what is actually wanted can take a long time if it's not clear or good communication up front.
I agree. And this is why, and I'll get to a little bit later, like questions that you can ask, because sometimes, and I don't know if you ever feel this way, it's almost like I should already know this, so I'm not going to ask, right?
Correct.
And that's what gets us in trouble sometimes, because it's like, well, I already know, and so I'm just going to get to do, and we're excited, like, I'm going to prove to you that I know, how to do this, and then you deliver it, and it's not that you didn't do a good job, it's just that you weren't, what is it, the difference between efficient and effective, right? So you can be efficient in getting it done on time, but if it's not what was wanted, then it wasn't effective. And it goes back to what Brett said about, the cost and being precise. So I found this. Can you see my screen here? Oh, this one's better. This is a better visual. It's a little bit bigger. But thank you for the thumbs up to tell me that. So here we can see this is how the project sponsor, proposed and described it, right? A tree with 3 seats on it. Then in the project request, somebody writes the requirements and they write it and they just say, oh, 1 seat. I don't know if you can see that. Let me make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Then the architect, because as Carmen mentioned, you're just like, oh, I know what they want. They want a tree with a swing on it. And nobody said that the swing needs to come off of the strongest branch. They just said they wanted it. And so it gets designed. And then the production team constructs it. They're like, you know what? We need to fix this because QA has got to it. And they're like, we need to make a change, when really the customer wanted a tire wheel hanging off, right? And if someone would have asked the customer in the beginning what they wanted, all of these steps could have been, more precise, concise, and it goes back to communication, because when there's no communication, two-way collaboration, then you don't know what that person wants. So thank you for that, Brett and Carmen. Let me see if I think I see a note here, because you wouldn't want to spend a lot of time, effort, and energy just to find out you misunderstood what the customer wanted or needed, and money. That one of the biggest reasons. So it's good for you for your career development to communicate, but from the company perspective, the better you communicate, the more money you make, right? Like, so people get paid more for the level of problems they're able to solve. If you are an order taker and someone just says, hey, Lisa, build this for me, and you just build it and you don't ask any questions, you don't push back, then you will be at a level like, oh, Lisa does exactly what we asked. That's awesome. But if you get an instruction and you say, I think that's a great idea, but I'm not sure if you want a tire or you want a regular rectangle seat. And that's important to me because it will determine how I build it. Now you've added more value. And a lot of times when you ask those questions, they'll be like, I never even thought of that. You know what? I'm not sure what type of seat I want. And if they don't know what type of seat they want and you build something, chances are they're going to come back and say, that's not what I want, but you gave me an idea of what I really do want. Steve, you have your hand up, I think.
Yeah, what I was going to say is you were talking about questions.
Mm-hmm.
I was tech support for 3 years, and you get a client on the phone, and if you don't know how to ask the right questions, you can completely misdiagnose whatever the issue is. Client will call and say, well, my screen is blank. Okay. Well, what kind of screen do you have? Is it plugged in? Have you turned on the on switch? And there's simple things,
Mm-hmm.
but if you don't ask them, you might miss them, and it just might be the problem. So you develop a skill set of learning how to ask simple questions without being condescending. Is what I'm
Yes.
looking for. So that your client will always give you a good review. It's like, oh yeah, he understands everything. When all I ever did was just ask the right questions in a manner that they didn't feel demeaned. And that's another aspect of good communication.
I agree. And there's a quote that I like, and maybe I'm misquoting, but it says like the level of your skill is determined by the level of questions you ask, not the level of answers you give. If you can actually tell how intelligent somebody is, or if they are connected, if they ask questions that actually are meaningful. Because sometimes, so imagine you're talking to somebody and they're like, what did you say again? Well, that's a question, but it's not a question that indicates they're actually in tune with what you're saying. But Shannon put something in the chat that I thought was really good, is what I hear you saying is that when you're taking a support call, it's important to ask the right questions so you don't miss. So now you've recapped what they said and they get a chance to process through whether or not that's really what they mean. And so that is a good way, Shannon, to do that. Is like, what I hear you saying is, and yes, Brandy, it's a great skill to have. Yeah, and Lisa gives a good example. Like, why won't my screen turn on? Oh, this is my microwave, wrong screen, right? Like, so, and these things happen because think about the times that we live in. Everybody's moving so fast, and for me, even when I'm like, if I like to try to figure things out on my own. And if I can't figure it out by just going through the steps, I'll just chat support somewhere. And meanwhile, I'm still working on it, and I may figure it out in the meantime. And so it's important to know that. So thank you for that, the commentary there. So thanks for sharing why you believe communication is critical. I added a few more reasons. One is reduces errors and rework. So that kind of goes along what we were talking about. But I wanted to share a stat that says 50% of project failures stem from poor communication. So imagine if the projects you work on have less failures and less rework. When I worked with a software company, we had gotten the development department had gotten to the point where they were tracking in Jira like all of the developers' work and how many of them had bugs that came back and the error rate that they had and how many bugs they had and how many, like, and so then you could see, like, wait a minute, why is this developer always having to do rework? Because maybe there's some poor communication there. And so keep that in mind as you are developing. Somewhere somebody is tracking how much rework and how many errors you have, and that they're grading your performance off of that. And again, with technology now, you're able to refine your process. And so the best way is really to communicate better and measure twice, cut once. It also builds trust and collaboration. 86% of employees blame workplace failures on lack of communication, right? So like if things break down, most of the time they blame like, well, this person didn't even ask me before they did it, or this person just jumped and did this, or, you know, or I don't trust their work. And so I'm going to go back and redo it behind them. And I'm not going to talk to them because I don't like them. Like, so if there's no trust and collaboration, it's difficult to communicate. And even to Steve's point, like when you're talking to a customer, the customer wants to trust you. So if you don't ask questions, you ever call a support line and you get some sort of automated dialer and they're like, hi, thanks for calling such and such. Are you calling for this, or this? And it's not even one of the options that you need. And so you press one and it's like, I'm sorry, you're having trouble. And then it sends you back over and over. You're like, human. You know, we do that because we don't trust. And so like, we don't want to be that person that they're like, I don't want to talk to you. You know, I want to talk to somebody else. And so building that trust and collaboration by listening. I don't know if we mentioned that earlier, listening to understand, not to be understood, right? Like, so sometimes we're so busy wanting to be heard that we can't hear what they're saying to be able to ask the questions. And that's another way you build trust. When you communicate well, it enhances problem solving. So clear requirements prevent costly misunderstandings. We already talked about that, so I won't reiterate. And then good communication saves time, money, and frustration. You know, people get frustrated at work simply because they are tired of like explaining themselves. And I work, one of the jobs that I had in the past, I worked with a leader who I was like, is she even on the same planet as us? Like, she didn't know anything about the projects we were working on. When people asked her stuff, she just couldn't. And that was frustrating to me, that she couldn't communicate. And she was the layer between our team and the executive team. And I'm like, well, if she can't communicate what they expect, how in the world are we going to do our jobs and do it well? And so it's important, you know, to alleviate frustration, to communicate well. So by the end of our talk, my hope is that you won't just communicate, but you'll command respect, because when you communicate well, people respect you. Just think of some good communicators or good leaders that maybe you don't even know them well or you haven't talked to them, but maybe they walk in a room or they're in a meeting and you're just like, wow, like they're in charge, or they know what they're talking about. You can tell. And so when you communicate well, you actually command and demand respect, because people respect you when you ask good questions, when you push back if necessary, right? When you share information and you're able to translate, you can become a bridge between two audiences, which is definitely a valuable in the times we live in. So at the end of this, hopefully you'll be able to understand requirements as a developer, communicate tech to non-tech audiences, learn how to push back and ask the right questions, because the answer is not always yes. Sometimes it's not right now, or let me learn a little bit more before I just go and do this, because again, your time is valuable as well. And then we'll have like two scenarios that we'll kind of talk through, just because I like to give examples and not just theory, like, you know, how would we handle a certain situation, so we don't feel like this, right? We don't want to be sitting at work with our hands over our face. So I want to talk about understanding requirements. So I mentioned that earlier as a developer, and it's crucial. Looking at that image that we looked at earlier, is because ambiguous requirements lead to scope creep and failed projects. So if, like in the example where the customer wanted the tire wheel and we built a rectangle seat, somewhere along the line there was ambiguous requirements that was not specific. And so when you're communicating, you want to drill in and find out exactly what it is they want. And some people, I'll tell you, get frustrated and they'll be like, well, why are you asking me this? You know, and you can politely say, well, I want to make sure I get it right, because I've had people get upset with me because I'm inquisitive. I want to know. And making sure you have thick enough skin, because somebody somewhere is going to say, like, it doesn't take all that. We don't need that. Like, well, we want to save time and money. So I want to make sure that we do this right the first time. Developers who ask the right questions save time and build better products. So like the software that I'm building right now, I could have, for a lower dollar amount, found some developers offshore on Fiverr or one of those freelancing apps. But what I thought to myself was, there will be a lot of back and forth because of the language barriers, right? There will be, I've never built a software product before, and I need experienced developers who are going to push back and ask me questions. And so I decided to go with a developer shop, at least for my first release, because I wanted to save time and build a better product the first time. It's not that I couldn't have built it another way. It's just that I needed someone to ask me those right questions. And so it is crucial to be able to communicate. So tips for understanding the requirements is, one is being able to ask clarifying questions. So if like in Carmen's example, where she was saying she built something and had to go back and do it, it's like, what's the goal? Who's the end user? Sometimes you're building something, and if you're building something for the customer, it is different than building it for an external customer than building it for an internal customer, because maybe there's different security that would come into play if it's for a external customer versus an internal customer. Maybe if it's for a specific type of end user, then maybe it needs to be branded a certain way, right? Like, so there are questions that come up by knowing, and these are just a couple of example questions, but as you are working on a project, these questions will come up, and I would encourage you to ask them. Repeat back. So Shannon is like in my brain today, I think. But repeating back what you heard in simple terms, right? Like, what I heard you saying is that you want an app that is for high school students who want to learn tech. Now, you want them to have this app. Now, are they going to learn how to code in actual coding language, or are they going to use if-then statements or images? Because the audience, the end user, is children, and sometimes they have apps that, you know, where you type in a prompt and then it builds, right? Like, so even asking questions like that, I'm just making that up on the fly to just give you an example of how you would go about clarifying. Repeating back simple terms, identify assumptions and missing details. So sometimes there is an assumption that's unspoken. So if you are building a dashboard, right, the assumption is that they're going to want some sort of visuals, not just text. So are you assuming that they want a pie chart? Are you assuming that they want a bar chart? Are you assuming that they want a scatter plot chart? Like, so And what is the best way to view the data? You may think, oh yeah, it'll be cool to see it in the scatter chart, but knowing how they're using it would determine what they want to do. You may also, if you are not the user experience or UX developer doing the design, then you would want to even work closely with the person who's designing it. If you're doing the back end and somebody else is doing the front end, how do you collaborate, and what assumptions? Like even throughout my project, there's requirements that we didn't include because I didn't even know that we needed them. Like for example, I'm building part of the application is a dashboard, and we're sending out assessments and surveys. Well, as we are, working to develop it, the designer was like, well, how are you going to know who received a survey? And I'm like, I don't know. We never even built the page, So, things like that come up in the middle of the project where somebody has to ask those questions and not just say, well, you didn't ask for it, so we're not building it. It's, hey, are you gonna need this? And I'm grateful for that. Brett has a question. Yep.
I was just going to chime in and say, in my roles in the past, you always have to think about who your customer is, and your customer might be the person sitting next to you as a designer. Maybe your customer is QA, maybe your customer is a front end team. And so always keeping that in mind and who the stakeholders are is exactly what you're talking about, because there's so many assumptions that get made.
That's so true. And identifying those assumptions, and then if you see something missing, like asking about it or saying like, did you mean to have this? Because I noticed that we don't have it there. Like when you do stuff like that, like when my developers come to me like that, I'm like, yep, I hired the right people. You're more expensive, but you're doing what I need to be done, right? So, and then get visuals or workflows if possible. So one of the things that I like that they also do is like creating a workflow chart, and they ask me like, what's going to happen after, and most decision makers don't want to sit down and go through that flow of what's supposed to happen. But without having that, you may miss something. And ideas, so we talked about earlier, making sure that we are as efficient and effective as possible. When you get through those workflows and even have a visual of how things are going to go, you uncover gaps that wouldn't be there. And that's a part of communication. All right, so we'll talk about, man, time passed really fast. It's almost 7:15. So I have two scenarios for us. Scenario one is vague requirements, right? So the product manager says to you, we need a dashboard that shows key business metrics. What would you say is missing from this? And what would you ask?
Well, first,
Lisa, looks like you have your hand up.
What metrics? How do you want them displayed? Who is going to be looking at them? That's 3 just off the top of my head.
Yep, and then John says, what time frame? That's a good one too. Carmen, did you have something? No? Okay. Yeah, so like, and how would you confirm like that you understand what they need in the first place? Like just thinking about this, like, oh, we need a dashboard, because to the person who needs the dashboard, that is super clear. Like, I need a dashboard for key business metrics. What are, now you may have a list of metrics, but what are the key metrics, right? What are the top ones that you need to be displayed? Also, is the dashboard one page, right? My dashboard that I'm building is multiple pages, and it's broken out into sections where some sections are internal facing, some are external facing, and each of the data points show something different. And so like somebody has to ask those questions. So in that scenario, here's, in addition to what Lisa shared and John, somebody said, what are they needing to gain from these metrics? Yes, that's true. Like, what is the outcome of that? What are the key business metrics that you need, right? Who will be using the dashboard? So we talked about the audience. Brett mentioned that a little while ago. So understanding who's using the dashboard is going to matter. So for example, Steve talked about support roles, right? Like, so a supervisor of the support team may need a different dashboard than the CEO would need. So if the CEO is looking at the dashboard, the CEO is going to have visibility into more information and care about higher level metrics than the supervisor of the support team. The supervisors of the support team will probably just care about the metrics for their individual department. Whereas the CEO is going to want to see a roll up probably of all the departments and how much it's costing them and whatever their KPIs are pertaining to those departments. They're going to see it. So knowing who is important. What format is preferred, right? Is it charts, tables? How do they want to see this? Another question that we need to ask is like, how often will this data be updated? Is this a real-time dashboard? How are we collecting the data, right? Like, so where is the data coming from? Can we trust the data? Are we integrating into a Tableau or Google Looker or into Power BI or one of these other tools that have data, or your regular database? Are we linking up to some sort of, AI, in-house AI that has data? Like, so knowing how often the data will be updated, where's the data coming from, and all of that. And so an example response to the product manager in this instance would be like, okay, to ensure we build the right dashboard, can you specify what key metrics are most critical, who will use them, and how often they should be updated? So whatever your questions are, you probably want to say like, to ensure we build the right dashboard, to ensure that we make sure the app meets your requirements, or to ensure this. So that way you preface why you're asking the questions in the first place. Sometimes people get upset when questions are asked because they don't understand the context of the question. Sometimes they can feel like you're being condescending if you're like, well, what metrics anyway? Like, what do you need? Why? And it's like, well, but if you say, hey, we want to build the right dashboard, now you've already set them up to know, here's why I'm asking, because I want you to be the hero, right? Like, so every leader or decision maker wants to feel like they are the hero and they did the right thing the first time and they saved the company money. And so when you make them feel like, I'm here to help you, I'm here to serve you, that you build that collaboration and trust that we talked about earlier. One more example I'll share is, explaining technology simply. So let's just say your non-technical manager says, why is this API taking so long to build, right? A bad response will be like, well, we need to implement. Are you familiar with Auth0, which is a authentication? Auth0 authentication, optimize API calls, right? Like, so if you say that, the non-technical manager is like, what is Auth0? What do you mean by authentication? What is an API call? I call on, Verizon. So I don't know what you're talking about as it pertains to an API call. And so being able to reframe it to them, like, because non-technical people always assume that everything can be done now. And so it's like, well, it's so easy. You should just be able to like type 2 buttons and the API is built. So why is it taking so long? And when you go into, remember we talked about jargon and explaining, using terminology that your audience doesn't understand, they're not going to get it. And so being able to explain it to them in a way that they can grasp it. A better way was like, we're ensuring that logins are secure and that data loads quickly so users have a smooth experience. This process takes time to get right. So I'll go back. We know that Auth0 authentication is a security feature, right? But if you say that, your end user or customer doesn't know that. But if you use language that we are ensuring that logins are secure, they understand that. And so being able to understand your audience and what they care about is important. And to know that you're trying to get it right. And so the best practice is to use relatable real world examples, like adding a security lock to a door so that they can translate. You can use analogies, focusing on the business value, like we're protecting user data. We want, speed to use the app, right? We keep it short and relevant, but finding ways to explain it that they care about is important. And then I think one of the last, I've got 2 more things to share, and I'll talk kind of fast, but feel free to talk. Oh, somebody said, I like that response was better. Thank you. I'll talk semi-fast, but I'm also watching the chat if you have a question. So also, you may need to push back and ask questions. So I wanted to give just a few tips. We talked about why it's important, right? You're not an order taker as a developer. You're a problem solver. You can challenge assumptions that leads to better solutions, and ask questions to show engagement, not defiance. I like what Steve said about not being, condescending. And so when you don't understand something, these are just a couple examples, and you can feel free to add other examples in the chat, but sometimes we don't understand. And Carmen and I earlier talked about how sometimes it's like, I feel like I should know everything right now. So I don't want to seem as if I'm inadequate. So I'm just going to just jump and build, or I'm not going to ask. But if you don't understand, it's perfectly safe. Can you clarify what you mean by X, Y, and Z, right? Or if they say something, because sometimes the person literally doesn't know what they want. He said, can we walk through an example of how to do such and such, right? Or how an example of how you would use this. And when you start hearing the example, you will uncover opportunities for improvement or gaps, or you may uncover that you have the right information. But either way, and them walking through it, they help to see like, oh, I'm missing. Like when the developer asked me, like, how are people going to know who took a survey? And I'm like, we don't even have a page. So I was grateful, like, walk me, because and the way he came to that question was saying, like, give me an example of how this is going to be used. And as I was going through that, then he had that follow-up question. Also, when you disagree, sometimes you disagree. You can disagree and disagree respectfully, right? So it's like, well, instead of saying you're wrong, like, no, that doesn't make sense. Why are you doing this? Nobody's going to hear you when you just speak like that, even if you're thinking it in your head, because sometimes we think like that's dumb. But don't say that out of your mouth. Like, what's the main goal behind this decision? Because sometimes it may not seem like a wise decision to you, but you may not have all the information. And it may be the best choice, but without you understanding or knowing, then you may miss out on, meeting their requirements. And so what's the main goal behind this decision? Or if you don't think that's going to work, instead of saying you shouldn't do that, like, have we considered, and then insert whatever your alternative is, right? Because that is a way where you can disarm the person and also get them to think about something differently. Because remember, if everybody or most people feel like they should know everything already, a lot of people just want to be right. And one of the things that I tell people in communication, I say, like, do you want to be right, or do you want the result? Right? If you want the result, you're not fighting to be right. It's like, have we considered to do this? Because if you just say, like, no, you're wrong, everybody's ears are going to close. One of my favorite quotes is by Jim Rohn, and he says, don't wish it were easier, wish you were better. Don't wish for less problems, wish for more skill. And whether it's communicating, developing, doing whatever, if it's not going to be easy to communicate, you're going to feel uncomfortable at times, especially when two people have different communication styles. But one of the things that I ask myself is, don't wish it were easier, wish it were better. How can I say this better? Right? Don't wish for less problems, wish for more skill. How can I be more skillful? Because even though I think I communicated it well, obviously I didn't, because I didn't get the result. And so how can I enhance my skills? Do I need to ask another question? Do I need to bring in data to say, like, sometimes you'll have to go off and pull some reports and say, like, hey, this is impacting this. And because of that, I want to make sure that we don't lose out on this money. And that's why I'm showing you this. Or our satisfaction scores are dropped, or showing data. Like, when you get more skill, you learn, like, what does this person care about? And how can I communicate it in their language? Their language may be dollar signs. Their language may be customer satisfaction. Their language may be, time, like saving time. Like, whatever that is, you get to know people and you know what's important to them. And then just recapping how to make complex ideas simple, avoiding jargon, focusing on why it matters to them, using visuals and examples to explain concepts, and then adjust based on the audience's familiarity. And the last thing that I'll say is, this is an acronym that I use. It's called STAND. And I say, whenever you're given a seat at the table, don't sit, stand. Being selfless, recognizing that it's not always about you. being tactful, meaning it's not what you say, but how you say it, being aware of how people are impacted and aware of how what you say impacts others, being nimble and flexible, because things, especially in the tech world, do not always go according to plan. Like my release, one of my software was supposed to be ready in March, and now it's May, like 2 months later. And so things do happen. And so being nimble and flexible, and then being daring enough to speak up, daring enough to challenge the norms. You don't necessarily have to take your shoes off and stand on the boardroom table, but you do want your voice to be heard and not be so focused on getting, whatever developed that you miss out on what the person needs. And so just being able to communicate that. Any thoughts or questions? I know we got about 6 minutes left. And Brett says a lot of times as a developer, it is reasonable to say no. Yeah. Brett?
I was just going to say, yeah, this is amazing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've been in industry for about 10 years and just starting with code use. So every issue you've described, I had a lot of flashbacks to sitting in conference rooms and literal, not myself, but yelling matches between supervisors and things, and, seeing the good and the bad. But just, there's a lot of great points. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have a handout that I'll send to Shannon if she wants to share that with you all, just with a recap of what I talked about. And it'll just share tips so you can use it to, if you want to refer back to it, like, what should I say? How do I frame this sentence? Thank you very much, Carmen. Thank you for all your feedback saying it was helpful. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn as well. And if there's no other questions, Shannon, I'll turn it back to you.
We have a couple hands up.
I didn't even see it.
It doesn't make it very obvious. Lisa, if you want to go ahead, and then Steve, we'll go to you.
Yeah, one thing just to add, I know that a lot of us as when we're entering as junior developers, we might think, well, the senior engineers and everything, they're the ones who have the expertise. So is it my place to question them? And arguably, I would like, I've heard things like it is exactly your place to question them, because one of the values that they said junior engineers bring to a team, as opposed to, say, AI, is that junior engineers will ask the right questions. They'll be like, why are we doing it this way? And may open up. So even if you don't think you have, even if you're like doubting your own expertise, it's good to ask those questions, because you may open up a path that hasn't been considered.
That's a great point, Lisa. And even with that, there's a way to do it tactfully, right? Like, because sometimes some of the developers, if you've been doing something for a while, you have an ego. And so you can be resistant, and being able to get the result and asking the question, like, why are we doing this way? Or, hey, and sometimes it's playing the new card. I'm new here. And so I want to make sure that I know, and that kind of helps disarm as well. Steve, your question?
Yeah, I was kind of like Brett. I was sitting here and just having flashbacks over some of the situations that have happened to me. But there's one in particular where someone told me I was wrong. And this is, God, I forget how old I was. I was just getting started. And I kind of got an attitude about it. Well, actually, I got mad. But over the years, I've learned to ask the question, what's the end game? What's the goal? What is it we're trying to do? And that kind of helped me to just kind of put my ego aside for a minute and focus on whatever resolution we need to come up with. And by the way, I've sat in on a lot of these meetings where, we talk about how we can communicate, how we can do better with customer service, customer retention. And this is one of the better ones. And I really thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your feedback. And I want to circle back to something you said about being, getting angry when someone tells you you were wrong as well. One of the things that I've learned to do, because naturally I get a little defensive too, is to take a step back and say, like, well, what did you expect? What did you think you were going to see? Or can you explain to me why you feel that way or why you believe that? And then they process through it. Sometimes they find out that they're wrong, but on the chance that that they're correct in what they're saying, it helps you to learn something new and you get better regardless. And then they walk you through it like, oh, okay, well, I didn't know that. Well, now next time I'm gonna do it this new way. Carol, I see your hand.
Yes. So do you have any recommendations on sources to blogs or YouTube creators, content creators, for people that kind of talk about tech often? I don't know if podcast is the right avenue to go, but somewhere where I can just get more exposure to people talking about these concepts. Honestly, I don't have a tech background, unfortunately, and I don't want to talk about technology, but I want to use the right syntax, I want to use the right verbiage or whatnot. And so I'm like, where would you recommend, since you've worked with a development team, you are working with one, like where would I go to just absorb jargon in an understandable way? I spent 4 hours in a machine learning workshop 2 weeks ago and I got like 15% of it.
Yeah, I was going to say YouTube, and Carmen actually put Alex the Analyst is great on YouTube. I would also use like Claude, the AI, ChatGPT, AI, and type your questions in there. And then go on YouTube. And if there's a specific topic that you want to listen to, type in that topic.
Okay.
Because I use YouTube a lot. YouTube, and I use a lot of different AI tools to kind of bounce ideas back and forth. But yeah.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
And then I'm sending a handout via Shannon as well to with just a recap of what I shared as well. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you staying with me until the very end, asking questions, engaging, and looking forward to you all. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, let me put that in the chat. And that way you can have it.
Yeah, this was fantastic, Shara. Thank you so much. And I'll be sure to share that handout in Slack for everyone tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks again, Shara.
Thank
I
you.
did send you a LinkedIn invite, and I know you're probably extremely busy person, but we should connect and maybe collaborate in the future with Code U on something.
Yeah,
Love
I
to
would
have you
love
back
that.
again.
And in the future, I will need to hire a development team because the team that's doing it is an external team, right? So once they build release 1, then I will be needing some developers to carry on for the future. So yeah, so stay in contact and you can see where I am on my journey.
That'd be
All right,
great.
thanks
Thank
everyone.
you so much. Have a great night, everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.